Well, welcome to the educational research section of www.happynumbers.org. This video deals with the research problem, or some considerations that you should have in if you are thinking about what am I going to do for my research problem. And the information, a lot of the information taken from this video comes from Leidy and Ormrod, Practical Research Planning and Design, the 7th edition. But they have a 9th edition out now, I believe, and you have the ISBN number. And I'm not selling books or anything, but this is a very good resource. In fact, that's why I've used it. Well, okay, so deciding on the research problem is really, it is, as it says there, the heart of the research process. One of the major reasons that doctoral students and master's students do not complete their degrees is they cannot come up with a research problem that is suitable for a research project or for a research thesis. So this video is designed to give you some very basic common sense insights into what to think about. So let's just take a look. Let me just get rid of this. Okay, so an overview. As I said, the whole heart of the research problem is the whole process is defining the problem or your area of inquiry and being able to formally state it in such a way that it indicates that it's evidence-based, that somehow it is evidence-based. That's critical. And it needs to be stated with a great deal of precision and clarity. In fact, the cliche is that a doctoral student is ready to do their dissertation once they can write their title. Because once you can write the title of your research project or your research thesis or dissertation, then you have clearly thought it through and you have a real good idea. Two important things to consider when you're considering what your area of inquiry will be or your thesis will be. You should address an important question or area. Somehow it should make a difference. It should expand the field or make a difference or help. And it should advance knowledge or inform educational practice. And it involves not just the collection of data, because if you're doing a thesis, you'll be collecting data, but you need to interpret that data, because collecting data is just collecting numbers. But it's the interpretation of that data that is critical. So those are some just basic overview considerations. And of course, you know you can stop this video or DVD or whatever you're watching this on at any time and take notes or give it some thought or whatever. Okay, let's continue. Here is basically the process. You sort of start to think about different areas of inquiry and you maybe select a couple of areas of inquiry, and then you take a look at the literature. And you allow the research literature to refine or inform or help shape your question or area that you're looking at. So you'll probably at that point do a preliminary review of the literature. And then you select a very specific research problem or topic or project or research question or hypothesis, and then you do an exhaustive review of the literature once you have defined that. Then you decide on a research design if you're doing a thesis and a methodology. And if you're doing a master's project, you won't be talking about a research design, but you'll be talking about what kind of a product or what are you doing for your project and what would be the methodology, how you are going about doing that, and what would be your objectives for your project. And then for your thesis or project, you're going to collect some data. In a thesis, you'll be collecting data that examines how you're going to look at your research question. In a master's project, you will be collecting data on how you are accomplishing your objectives, because you've established in your methodology, you've established objectives, and how will you be collecting data on that. Then you will, whether you're doing a thesis or a project, you'll analyze and present your data. And for a thesis, a study, you'll probably use statistical tables and interpretive diagrams. And you may, depending if you're doing a project, what you're doing a project on, you may have some interpretive diagrams, or you may have if you've developed the curriculum, then it will be you're presenting your curriculum guide, or if it's a website, the website, or things like that. And then you will interpret your findings and then state your conclusions or generalizations about your area of inquiry or the problem. And that's basically what you will be doing. That's the research process. Okay, now back to stating your problem. Again, it needs to be stated very clearly, completely. You want to get rid of all misunderstanding. If you're doing a thesis, then you're going to probably state it in terms of a hypothesis. And if you're not doing a thesis, if you're doing a project, then you'll probably have a research question or an area of inquiry. In either case, thesis or project, you're going to talk about what you intend to do and what you intend not to do. You're going to want to define any terms that would be outside the common understanding. And you'd like to present a clear statement of assumptions on which your project or your thesis rests. What are the theoretical underpinnings? You want to avoid fragments or unclear goals or unclear statements. Here, let's take a look. The effects of welfare on children's attitudes, or the effects of busing on school children, or the effects of retirement plans for adults. Well, those are really too vague. Pardon my hand intruding here. So let's go back to the welfare. A specific way of maybe stating a question about that is, what effects does welfare assistance to parents have on attitudes of their children towards work? Now, that's a very specifically stated question. That's researchable. The first one is not. The effects of busing on school children, well, that's way too vague. We might state something like what factors must be evaluated and what are the relative weights of those factors in constructing a formula for estimating the cost of busing children in Contra Costa School District. That's a much clearer statement, a much more researchable. So we want to then get rid of fragments. We want our questions and problems to be researchable and very clearly stated. We want to be able to think through the feasibility of the project. Here's a silly example. So one student has written, this study proposes to study the science programs in secondary schools in the United States for the purposes of yada, yada, yada. Well, no one is going to be able to study all of the secondary programs in the United States. That's way, way too huge, way too expensive, too time consuming. You may want to limit it, or to become more precise, this study proposes to survey the science programs in selected secondary schools throughout the United States, or maybe in selected secondary schools in Northern California, or in selected secondary schools in Solano County, California, something like that. Limits and much more precisely stated. Finally, okay, here are some things to avoid. Some things to avoid. Avoid an area of inquiry which simply gathers existing information. You're gathering information that already exists and putting it together. That's not adding new knowledge. That's not a piece of research. That's just collecting information. So you want to avoid that. I'm going to put these two together. You want to avoid problems whose sole purpose is to compare two existing sets of data, because the data already exists. So comparing it doesn't really enlighten us about anything. And in the same vein, you want to avoid problems that calculate a correlation coefficient between two sets of data or between two variables. Self-esteem and grade point average, let's say. We want to correlate those two variables. Well, and what do we find? We say, well, there's a relationship between self-esteem and grade point average. Well, okay, so there's a relationship. First of all, we don't know Which came first here, the chicken or the egg, the self-esteem or grade point average? Does grade point average cause increases in self-esteem? Does increases in self-esteem cause grade point average? These are correlation coefficients. Correlation coefficients are simply a statistic. It's just a mathematical statistic. It talks about a strength and direction, but it doesn't tell us anything about why there's the relationship between self-esteem and grade point average. So avoid questions that are just looking at two variables and trying to find out whether there is a relationship or not. And finally, avoid problems where there's simply a yes or no answer, because again, that doesn't really extend our knowledge. Is homework beneficial for children? So we answer yes or no. But the real question is, why is homework beneficial, or why is it not beneficial for students? In what ways is it beneficial? Under what circumstances is it beneficial? Well, okay, that's just a very quick overview of some things that you should consider when you are developing an idea for your research thesis or your research project. Thank you very much.